So, I had a coaching session yesterday, which is relevant to this video. My client is 6 months into a new leadership role at a brand new company. He takes his job seriously and he's very qualified for the position. He received feedback that he now needs to up-level his skills on leading his team and building up those people. And he mentioned something in passing, thinking it was minor. One of his team members had shared with him in a recent one-on-one that she was frustrated. She'd been getting feedback from her peers that when she asked questions during project updates, she slows things down. So she made a decision. She stopped asking them. She went quiet in meetings. She pulled back from the project discussions entirely. He told me this and then said, well, she needs to figure it out on her own. And I want to be clear, that's not a cruel response, and it's not even an unusual one. From inside his natural way of operating, moving fast, trusting your instincts, keeping the momentum going, it's a completely reasonable read. She had a communication challenge. She's a capable adult. She'll sort it out. But here's what he missed. And this is what we're always learning. Interpersonal dynamics are complicated. She wasn't complaining about her peers. She was telling him that she had stopped seeing value in being on the project, that she had withdrawn from meaningful engagement with his team, that she didn't know how to navigate what was happening to her in the environment he was responsible for creating. One small conversation, she told him a lot about what was wrong with his team culture and where it was starting to break down, and he missed it because the way he naturally processed information didn't give him a clear view of what she was actually trying to say to him. That's what we're talking about today. It doesn't have to be the dramatic trigger like the moment someone does something directly that really sets you off, but it's the simpler one, that moment your natural thought pattern or problem-solving pattern and someone else's creates a dynamic that neither of you can fully see from the inside of the conversation. And more importantly, we're going to talk about what to do when you finally notice it. I'm Christina Holloway. For over 25 years, I've coached senior leaders at organizations like Google, GE, and Spotify to architect their authority and navigate the high-stakes politics of the Fortune 500. On this channel, I show you how to recognize the power plays hiding in plain sight and how to communicate with the presence that demands a seat at the table. Last week, we talked about the dial, the idea that your behavioral habits aren't fixed. They're actually patterns you learned, practiced, and can consciously adjust when you see them clearly enough. Today, we go one layer deeper. What happens when two people's natural patterns collide? And that misunderstanding produces a reaction or trigger that neither of them intended and neither of them fully understands. This video is about that trigger and what your reaction is actually telling you about yourself and about the situation you're in. All right, so let's get started. Let's start with what's actually happening underneath the trigger because it's very easy to misread it. When you feel that particular frustration with a specific colleague, it could be the one who always seems to slow things down, or the one who never seems to think anything through, or the one whose energy is like fingernails on a chalkboard every time they open their mouth in a meeting. The instinct is to make it about them, their behavior, their problem, their need to change. And we're going to look at the Hogan again here. There's more to it than just he's so annoying. That trigger is almost never really about the other person. It's about the collision between two patterns, yours and theirs. And once you understand what's actually colliding, the whole dynamic becomes something you can work with rather than something that just happens to annoy you or undermine you. So let me show you what this looks like with the specific Hogan Development Survey pairings. And these are very common. The bold scale concerns seeming fearless, confident, and self-assured. A person with a high bold score moves fast, trusts their own judgment, doesn't need extensive input before acting, and has genuine difficulty understanding when others hesitate before they do. At a moderate score, bold in the 50s, this shows up as appropriate self-confidence, someone who takes initiative without being overbearing, who can admit mistakes, who disagrees productively. At a high score, bold in the 90s, it tips into something different. Overconfidence, entitlement, resistance to input, the assumption that the right answer is whatever already makes sense to them. The cautious scale concerns risk aversion, fear of failure, and avoiding criticism. A person with a high cautious score needs to process before acting. They ask questions that others experience as redundant. They worry about mistakes, their own and the team's, and they move very carefully. Doing otherwise feels dangerous to them. At a high score, cautious in the 90s, it tips into something that looks from the outside like paralysis, excessive reassurance seeking, a conservative approach that frustrates everyone who needs the team to move. Now, here's the thing I want you to see. These two people are not in conflict because one of them is wrong. They're in conflict because each person's natural operating mode is the other person's worst case scenario. The bold person looks at cautious and sees someone who is holding up the project hostage to their own anxiety. The cautious person looks at bold and sees someone who is going to create an expensive problem by moving before they have enough information. Okay, so both of those reads feel completely justified from their own point of view, and both of them are missing the most important thing. Neither of them is describing the other accurately. Both are describing their own fear, reflected back at them through the other person's behavior. And this is what I talk about when I debrief the Hogan. The Hogan doesn't measure who you are. It measures what you seem like to others. The behavioral impression your habits create regardless of your intent. That's why some of these descriptions say concerns seeming to be this way or that way. The cautious team member on my client's team wasn't trying to slow the project down. She was doing quality control. She was catching the questions that needed catching before they became problems downstream. But she seemed like an obstacle, right? And that impression, not what she intended, is what her peers were reacting to. They were labeling her so they could make sense of her constant questions. You know, you're asking too many inconvenient questions. You must be difficult to work with. The trigger is almost never about what the other person meant. It's about what they seemed like in that moment through the lens of your own pattern assumptions. Once you see that clearly, you stop trying to change the other person and you start asking a much more useful question. So here's the more useful question. When you feel triggered by someone's pattern at work, what is that reaction actually telling you? Most leadership advice at this point says, try to see it from their perspective. Put yourself in their shoes. Practice empathy. And I want to address that because it's advice I've always found deeply frustrating and one-dimensional, and it's lazy advice from people who do not know how to lead. Here's why. When you're in an active triggered response, you know, when someone's really pushing your buttons on a project, you cannot think your way into the other person's experience. No empathy exists there. Your nervous system isn't set up for that. Your behavior pattern is running. Your dial is set to high. So asking you to abandon your own perspective in that state doesn't produce empathy. It produces resentment. More importantly, you shouldn't have to leave yourself behind to find a way through. That's just not what good leadership actually requires. The answer isn't to try to look at it from their perspective. The answer is to look at it from a structural perspective. You don't need to play psychologist to the person pushing your buttons, and you don't need to abandon your own point of view. Instead, treat the situation like a cut diamond. So I don't have cut diamonds sitting around my house, but I have this little stone. A well-cut diamond or stone has multiple surfaces, and each surface catches and reflects light differently. This is the same as dealing with a difficult situation. When you shift perspective, you see the situation from a different light. And when you are triggered, You are locked onto a single painful surface. This person is an obstacle. Shifting your angle means looking at the surface that has nothing to do with your interpersonal friction and everything to do with the business reality. You aren't trying to understand them. You are trying to understand the situation and the full landscape. And that rotation is what changes perspective. Coaching questions are how you do it. Rotate the stone. Not questions about the other person either. Questions about the situation and what your reaction to the situation is actually revealing about where you are right now. Question number 1, what am I actually reacting to? Their behavior or what their behavior means to me? These are not the same question. The cautious team member asked questions during project updates. That's the behavior. She's slowing us down is the interpretation. She doesn't care about the timeline is the story built on top of that interpretation. The trigger lives in the space between what happened and what you decided it meant. The gap is where the most useful information is hiding. Question number 2, what does the trigger tell me about where my own dial is currently set? Your reaction is data, okay? If a colleague's careful, questioning approach feels genuinely intolerable to you, be honest. If it produces something that feels like urgency or even anger, that's worth examining. What's driving that urgency? What are you afraid will happen if the pace slows? What does your dial say about the pressure you're currently under? The trigger is pointing somewhere. Follow it inward before you follow it outward. This is also where I'm going to take a minute to share a reminder. We're talking about general frustration here with people that you're okay working with, but sometimes frustrate you. If you feel defensiveness in a real sense that someone is undermining you on purpose, it's important to start documenting it and take action by bringing it to someone's attention. But I can tell you, if your supervisor says your take is a little off about the situation, then you might be too in your head. Take the time to ask some follow-up questions to see where you've lost perspective and how you can find a way forward. Question number 3, what surface of this situation haven't I looked at yet? My client saw a team member with a communication problem. That was the surface he was looking at. He hadn't yet rotated to the surface that showed him a team culture problem or the surface that showed him an engagement and retention risk or the surface that showed him a leadership opportunity, a chance to create conditions where a high cautious team member's instinct for quality control became an asset rather than a problem. All of those surfaces were present in the same 30-second disclosure. He was only seeing one of them. Question number 4, if I led from a different strength right now, what would that look like? This is the dial question reframed for that interpersonal moment. You are not one-dimensional. Your pattern has multiple expressions and your profile has multiple scales. A bold manager has decisiveness and momentum. He also has the capacity for direct, honest, caring conversations. Those are both his. The question is which one he brings forward in this specific moment. So leading from a different strength means choosing which part of yourself you put in front of it. So these 4 questions don't resolve the trigger immediately. They're not designed to. What they do is slow the thinking down long enough for the situation to present more of itself. And in a triggered state, slowing down is the intervention. It gives you the opportunity to rotate and shift perspective. It's how you see the situation from a different light that you haven't considered yet. So let's go back to my client. After we slowed down enough to actually look at what his team member had said, the full picture, which included different ways to interpret the message, everything shifted. She wasn't asking him to fix her communication style. She wasn't asking him to mediate a conflict with her peers. What she was actually telling him in a one-on-one conversation was 3 distinct things simultaneously. That she had withdrawn from meaningful engagement with his team, that she no longer saw the value in contributing her perspective to the projects she was supposed to be leading alongside her colleagues, and that she didn't know how to navigate a dynamic that her peers had created around her. That was a team dynamic happening inside the culture he was responsible for shaping. Once he could see that new perspective, the question changed entirely. It stopped being about what she needed to figure out on her own. It became about what he needed to do as her manager. We worked through what a follow-up conversation with her might look like, and it was about understanding her experience and creating the conditions where her contribution could actually land. He came up with questions like, what would it look like from your perspective to feel genuinely valued on this team? When do your questions add the most value in a project? And when do they feel most dismissed? What would you need from me to feel safe raising a concern in a group setting again? Those aren't soft questions, they're strategic ones. Because here's what a high cautious team member actually brings to a high bold team when the conditions are right. She catches the errors that their enthusiasm missed. She slows the team down through intentional decision making. She might ask a lot of the same questions, but she's also quality control. That's not a liability. That's a competitive advantage, but it has to be in the right environment, deployed in the right conditions by a manager who understands what he has. Remember this, a high development score doesn't determine your behavior and that's it. It describes a behavior pattern that can dominate when you're not paying attention. The moment you start paying attention, you start making mindful choices that work to your advantage. He has a high bold score, and he sat on the call and took notes on how to ask better questions. Those two things are both true simultaneously. Your trigger is real, your behavior pattern is real, the impact it has on the people around you is real. And your ability to rotate the stone, to slow down, to ask the questions underneath the reaction, to find the surface you haven't looked at yet, that's real too. That choice is always available to you. It just requires you to stop long enough to reach for it. Here's what I want you to take from today. Every time someone's pattern collides with yours and produces that automatic, almost involuntary reaction, that's giving you information. This data about the situation, about the dynamic, and about where your own dial is currently set. The leaders who develop the most aren't the ones who never get triggered. They're the ones who get curious about it instead of reacting to it. It takes practice. And like every practice, it starts with slowing down long enough to ask a different question. What am I actually reacting to? What does this trigger tell me about where I am right now? What surface, perspective of this situation haven't I looked at yet? And if I led from a different strength at this moment, what would that look like? You don't have to answer all four perfectly. You just have to pause long enough to ask one of them. That pause is sometimes all it takes to see the light from a different perspective that changes everything. Next week, we go into the strengths and weaknesses conversation directly, how the same pattern that creates friction in one environment becomes a genuine superpower in another. That's a video I've been looking forward to building all month. If today's video resonated, if you recognized yourself as the manager, the team member, or honestly both, I want to hear about it in the comments below. Tell me which surface of your situation you haven't looked at yet, because naming it out loud is always the first step in finding a new way forward. My free communication toolkit is linked in the description below. On a final note, the next time you feel that particular frustration with that particular person, ask yourself which surface of this diamond you haven't looked at yet. Sit with that and then take action. I'm Christina Holloway. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.